Hi everyone, Rick the Morano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of this new Macklemore album, Ben. Macklemore, Seattle's great rap motivator, he is back with his first full-length album in about 6 years. And at this point, it's kind of weird to look back on that gap of time and the brief run that he had before it. Macklemore's been active since the early 2000s, but didn't actually experience a blow-up until 10 years later with dramatic, inspirational, commentary-packed singles like Wings and Same Love, as well as Can't Hold Us. Oh, and who can forget the real defining hit of his career, the silly Frugal Boy anthem, Thrift Shop. These tracks would go on to help make up his breakout album with producer Ryan Lewis, The Heist, which hasn't aged as well as it could have with its slightly out-of-touch social critiques, slightly corny humor, and a few weird outliers like the song Cowboy Boots. But the project was decent enough and certainly one of the more interesting hip-hop records to hit the mainstream that year. Late 2012, I think most people were content to let Mac have his moment, even if his style and vibe wasn't exactly their cup of tea. The Heist didn't start getting backlash until the hubristic bubble it was living in popped. Because The Heist exists in a headspace where its success was earned on merit alone. Just look at the intro where Mac claims to have put in his 10,000 hours. And also remember that this album was produced and released independently, totally independently, and I think most people do like to see an artist make it who is not a part of the label stable. But still, that doesn't change the fact that from the moment Macklemore had hits, the entertainment industry was so desperate and so quick to turn him into the next great white hope for hip-hop. And I don't think the gravity and harm of that framing really hit everyone until 2014, when The Heist beat out one of the greatest concept albums of all time, Good Kid, Mad City, for Rap Album of the Year. What is usually the highlight of any artist's music career became a blemish of tone-deaf racial bias in the music industry. Now, since then, Macklemore's career has kind of been one of diminishing returns. The next album he did with Ryan Lewis mostly felt like a bloated and over-budget sequel to The Heist, and the feature-heavy solo effort Gemini he put out a year later was handily the worst record he had released up until that point, which is sort of what has me worried here about Ben, because this is another solo outing for Mac, though Ryan is in the mix a little bit here. But I suppose it's been a while. Could have been enough time for a reset or a redirection for Mac, a time to kind of collect his thoughts and aspirations artistically. Many of the lyrics on this thing also detail the time he's recently spent getting back on the straight and narrow, being a dad, and also finding God. I suppose he spent some time finding himself, since the title of this thing is after his first name, which is all well and good. I'm glad Mac has taken the time to put effort into his own mental health, because as a result, it sounds like he's in a better place emotionally here. But what he has not taken the time to do on this project is come up with any refreshing musical ideas or compelling song concepts. Because when I tell you this record is awful, man, it's awful. Which is a shock, because the hopeful piano-backed pop rap on the opening track, Chant, was kind of par the course for Macklemore. With this cut, I more or less expected an album that would be at the level of those Ryan Lewis LPs. The song also goes over way better than I could have imagined, given that Tones and I is featured on the chorus. But the beat and piano licks are pretty urgent, kind of reminds me of something from one of Kanye's first 2 LPs, but with some epic, hopeful, millennial radio ballad vibes laced into it. The rapping's not too bad either. Definitely looking forward to hearing Macklemore rap into an SM58 at age 78. So yes, it's a passable start to a record, which violently nosedives immediately after and crashes repeatedly song after song. Because the following track, No Bad Days, has Target commercial vibes written all over it. It just sounds like a goddamn Target commercial. From the carefree shouts of "No bad days" to the sequenced beat and tightly snapped synth bass line, the whole thing just feels like 30% off. It feels like buy one, get one. Then 1984 is literally a Future Islands song. Macklemore heard a Future Islands song and decided he was just gonna write one and put it on his album and just pretend it's not embarrassing. It's produced like a Future Islands song. He's singing on it like he's freaking Sam. What is he doing? Maniac is another ballad on the record that has some basic acoustic guitar chords hanging in the background, and the lyrics are all about a love that's crazy. Oh, it's crazy. It's kind of like a Hobo Johnson song for guys who actually get into relationships. God, when he says, "Why the hell you follow me to Walmart? Gotta know everything, you ain't Nardwar?" The narrative of the track essentially paints this picture of a couple where everything is toxic as hell, but they're staying together anyway because, I guess, volatile and awful relationships are cute and cool. Next, Day You Die is a song I don't really mind the sentiment of. Macklemore kind of goes over the highs and lows of his life up until this point in a very passionate way, but once again, he decides to do this over more rock and pop-oriented drums, synths, guitars, super basic chord progression, very off rap singing where the pitch is just not there. Then from here we get almost a weird little pattern where the song ideas or aesthetics kind of come in twos. Next, we have a couple of real rap songs on the album. We got the song Grime. There's a pretty groovy funk beat on this track that features some cool horn breaks. The bars are witty, braggadocious. Macklemore is sounding pretty charismatic on it overall. It's easily one of the best songs so far, and that's partially because he doesn't really put his foot in his mouth on this one. But slightly before this, we have the song Heroes featuring DJ Premier, which might be my least favorite song on the album, maybe my least favorite Macklemore song ever, because I think this song kind of gets to the heart of something awful, the reason why white people will never really be taken all that seriously in hip-hop music. I really have no idea why Macklemore is making and writing this track. I thought he was more self-aware than this. While I kind of get the aim of the song, who it's supposedly targeted toward, especially as he raps about idolizing rappers as a kid and says things like, my heroes didn't look like yours, which is fine, is great. I'm glad that in a sense Macklemore understands and is putting out there that during the 80s and during the 90s, hip-hop culture was very much othered. It was not as widely accepted as it is today, and for very obvious reasons that have to do with racial bias. But the appreciation Mac shows for the heroes on this track doesn't really extend to their artistry or the obstacles they had to overcome in their lives, or the fact that they built this groundbreaking genre from the ground up. He actually seems more into them because they were cool, mean, bad guys who did naughty stuff and crimes. Literally saying on the track it was hip-hop's fault he wanted to sell drugs, smoke, drink, and fuck, which is about the dumbest thing I think a white guy can say about rap music, and yet Macklemore says it on a rap song. This is literally the think of the children argument boomers use against rap music when warning other parents to not let their kids listen to it. You literally have rappers right now arguing on behalf of their art form, saying, hey, listen, we make art, we make entertainment, please don't use our lyrics against us in court, please don't presume that we're trying to indoctrinate your children. Meanwhile, you have Macklemore here saying, woo, hip-hop made me want to fucking smoke weed, yeah! It's not about the culture or about any struggles that culture may face, and it's painfully obvious that it's his whiteness causing him to have that perspective, which again is unfortunate because I remember a time where the music industry and many writers collectively golf clapped at him in response to that White Privilege 2 track. Plus, I would like to personally think that as an outsider to the culture, you should be able to enjoy and appreciate hip-hop music for something other than just being like a degenerate thrill or something you can use to inject coolness into your otherwise sheltered life. But this track sets back any argument I could make for that by about 10 years or so. So thanks. Next on the record, we have some annoyingly preachy cuts where Mac kind of gives us food for thought on things like materialism and social media. There's the song I Need, where he raps about having everything he could possibly want, oh, and yet he's still unhappy. Like, literally, there's so many songs about exactly this. How could he possibly think at this point in time in the history of hip-hop and popular music that he's actually, saying anything we haven't heard already? Has he really convinced himself that, yeah, this is the message the people need. This is gonna make it dawn on them. Then the song Lost is, yeah, social media bad, likes bad, algorithms bad, bad. We're so obsessed with public image. Oh, and there's an awfully sung chorus on this song as well that just sounds completely just tone deaf. And while I do agree in a sense with what the song is going for, I think social media can be pretty toxic and the algorithms are getting worse and worse and worse every year in terms of the garbage they feed us and the way that they kind of wall people off into their respective ideological or content type bubbles. Still though, this track barely scratches the surface surface of any of that. Now, given that Macklemore has wrestled with this quite a bit in his life, it is only understandable that he has a few tracks on here about addiction. The song Faithful is very much about relapsing, and while I think a lot of the content lyrically of this track hits hard, I absolutely do not get why the instrumental sounds like the music bed to some kind of Nickelodeon cartoon Halloween special. It almost makes being hooked on drugs sound kind of spooky. Meanwhile, on Tears, we have Macklemore rapping about a substance as if he is in a relationship with it, like a romantic sort of relationship. And has Eminem not done bars and verses about exactly this, but much better? Again, I appreciate the heart and the topical focus, but I just don't really think Macklemore brings much to this angle. Then we have him rapping about making amends and getting on a good path with the song Sorry, which unfortunately is not an apology for how the album's been going so far. We have more bad rap singing on this cut, underscored by very sentimental pianos and strings. It's got a millennial pop chorus attached to it too. And the lyrics are very much about how Macklemore has been kind of crap in life generally and in a relationship, and he's hoping for some kind of redemption. Then on God's Will, he fully goes Christian rap, but it's actually one of the better written and produced songs on the entire LP. Lots of strong sentiments on this one as well in regards to temptation, fame, the music industry. I'm not particularly religious myself, but this topic does seem to really light a fire within Macklemore and does lead to one of the more tasteful cuts on this project. Now, I think the tone and energy of this track kind of guides the rest of the album from here, the final leg. We're getting sad, we're getting dramatic, tears are welling up in our eyes as we're crossing the finish line. Our competition is far behind us in this perseverance fantasy, where we are winning, but we're also like bettering ourselves too. We have the song I Know, where Macklemore is worrying about the future, the past, the present. The main takeaway from this one, just value your time and don't waste it, which he delivers over a very Drake-type beat. Then there's the closing track, Taillights, which is really all about traveling through this journey called life on a long road, driving through twists and turns. There's a fork in the road. What direction am I going in? My compass is broken. We're going at a certain speed, and God's been here ahead of me on the journey the entire time. Just about every traveling song cliche you could imagine is worked into the track, as Macklemore reminds us that I guess he's not worrying too much about what other people think of him these days. So yeah, this album overall, pretty awful. I think it sort of stuck the landing, or at least the last third of it was much more tolerable than anything that happened up until that point. But yeah, this record was a severe disappointment, and honestly, my hopes for it weren't even that high. And it's not because the production is bad, though sometimes it is. And it's not because the rapping is bad, though sometimes it is. And it's also not because the writing is bad, though sometimes it really, really, really is. My major issue with this record is that much of it rings hollow, because Macklemore couches so much of his music's appeal in its meaning. But there's very little actual depth to this supposedly personal album that obviously thinks it's profound. Feeling a light to decent 2 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like, please subscribe, and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Macklemore, forever.